Right, welcome back. This is lesson number 4, when theories are put into action, applied studies. Today we are focusing on that political spectrum. We're going to go back to the French Revolution to make a greater sense of it. We're also going to look at some hypothetical studies so that we can add to our breadth of evidence in A2 essay writing. And we'll look at some contemporary issues like healthcare and taxation as we continue to build our case studies for A2 and as we continue to apply our knowledge of individualism and collectivism. Now, here in this document, if you can't remember much about the French Revolution, there is a document that you can go to that will give you a summary of some of the main events and the transition. Now, many students end up using the French Revolution as a case study in their essay writing because we have, a common people, the French people, struggling with reoccurring problems and different political systems that are experimented to solve those problems. In the French Revolution, we go from 1789 and a monarchy to a republic, and eventually to a military dictatorship under Napoleon. And against this backdrop, we can weigh and contrast the successes and failures of each of these political systems. So many people do see the French Revolution, although a social 11 topic, as a very important and useful case study here in 30. Now, let's talk about the revolution for a moment and the political spectrum, because the political spectrum really, in its modern sense, was born out of that revolution. So let's go back with that key term, conservative. Conservatives are those who like the status quo. So in 1790, the status quo would be that you have a constitutional monarchy. 1789 was the beginning of the revolution, but 1790 you'd have a constitutional monarchy, and the conservatives they didn't want any greater change. They thought that the change that was achieved was enough. Let's slow it down and let's create some success with this foundation of a new society we're building. But you could also have reactionaries in 1790. 1790 reactionaries would be those who look at this new state and say, we've made a mistake with this experiment. We need to go back. And some reactionaries were using violence and creating a civil war to pull the French state back into the old regime. That would be an example of reactionary because they're trying to regress back into a traditional system that they once had, and they're using violence to achieve it. So there's a difference between conservatives and reactionaries. Reactionaries are using violence to go back. Conservatives are planted in the status quo. Now, most of the Parisian street people were neither conservative nor reactionary, but they were quite liberal. And the more committed to change that they became, the more radical that they became as well. And there's a group of radicals called the Jacobins that were committed to using violence to achieve their ends. So at either end of the spectrum, you have radicals and reactionaries, both using violence, but to change France in different directions. The radicals, the Jacobins, like Robespierre and Desmoulins and Danton, they were radically committed to creating a new France. Whereas reactionaries, some of the displaced immigrants, the nobles that had benefited from the old regime, they were trying to use violence to restore the old order. And therefore, we have the two ends of the spectrum. Now, in the middle of the spectrum, you have liberals and conservatives, depending upon how committed to change they are. Liberals are more progressive, conservatives are more attached to the status quo. So definitely go back to that case study here if it is a case study that you're unfamiliar with. I want to talk about hypothetical studies here today as well. Now, these hypothetical studies like 1984 and Brave New World, they are outlined in the textbook, and the textbook does a good job introducing them, but I'd like you to have a little bit more than what's in this textbook. I'd like you to have enough that you can use them as case studies in your writing. One of the things that really highlights some essays over others is breadth of evidence, meaning that you have many types of evidence. And one of the types of evidence that students struggle with finding is hypothetical evidence. So here are two hypothetical case studies, 1984 and Brave New World, that we can use to try to establish what is the most desirable relationship between government and governed. And it also allows us to unpack some language like dystopia and Orwellian. So here in the digital textbook, I have for you a link to a TED Talk on that term Orwellian. Nice thing about TED Talks would be that they're often very short. This is 6 minutes long, and very focused, very precise. So after you view that TED Talk, and yes, I would like to see you go back and watch this one here. After you watch that one, no doubt you will be able to use that term Orwellian. Now, just as a quick highlight, Orwellian and refers to the George Orwell story, 1984, and within it, government is seen as a big brother that is always watching. So the term Orwellian today really has been used to describe a surveillance state, a state where there is an invasion of that Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Bill of Rights, the right to privacy from the government, and the government is all watching and controlling and manipulating the people. But definitely look at that TED Talk about the term Orwellian. Now, in terms of Orwellian, we have this source, and manipulation of this source has been on the diploma once already, and it's brilliant. It's brilliant, but it's funny in that the people who ended up creating this source actually thought that there was no irony behind it. Secure beneath the watchful eyes, you have these eyes in the sky, and you have a bus in London. And the Metropolitan Police are suggesting, and the Mayor of London is suggesting, that because of closed caption television that is now going to be located on buses, the buses will be safer. But the way that the illustrator drew this poster that would have been, throughout the bus system in London, many people felt uncomfortable. They had a reaction to the poster, and they felt that the eyes in the sky were invasive. And that's what makes many, when they're looking at this poster, think of Orwellian society, this idea of a surveillance state. So another term that we use is the idea of dystopia. And although dystopia is a term that is coming from English language arts, there's definitely overlap within the humanities. And dystopia is a term that you can use when you're talking about our relationship between government and governed. So what is a dystopia? A dystopia is a society that, at first glance may appear to be ideal, but when you take a closer look, there's a tragic flaw. There's a flaw to that society. And again, London of 1984 may at first glance appear to be ideal until you really look at the amount of privacy that has been lost as you've been subject to the government surveillance. So there's another quick little TED Talk here, 6 minutes on what is dystopia. Take a look at that. And I would like you in your essays to be able to talk about two specific dystopias. Now, in order to talk about 1984, in order to talk about Brave New World, you're going to need a plot summary. So there's two Sparks Notes links here as well, that after you watch it, you should be able to have an understanding of the plot, the theme, the characters, the conflict, and therefore be able to use those literary stories as hypothetical case studies. So these two links here are critical in terms of trying to capture an understanding of the stories and to know how they were dystopias. Now, you don't necessarily need both. Maybe you're going to say, you know what, Mr. McBride, I only have a limited amount of time. I'm going to focus on one over the other. 1984 has definitely been used more times than Brave New World on the diploma exams, but both of them are more rare than you would think. And when they are used effectively, they look fantastic. Another theme that you can unpack by looking at Brave New World in 1984 would be the struggle between the principles of individualism and collectivism, those principles that are, once again, pages 71 to 85 in here. So if you're still struggling with what those principles are and how to apply them, after watching those summaries, those Sparks Note summaries of those two videos, you might be able to say, okay, am I seeing adherence to collective norms here? Am I seeing individual rights and freedoms? To what extent do these societies become dystopia? Is it because they're too collective or too individualist? All right, so those are some hypothetical case studies. Again, you're not going to see them on provincial multiple choice exams. You may see them on my multiple choice exams, but more than anything, I'm putting them there for you so that you can add to your writing case studies. Next up, we have contemporary issues. Now, again, to add to your writing case studies, we would like you to be able to explore some contemporary issues in great depth so that you can show your understanding of individualism and collectivism and your understanding of the conflict between government and governed. And one of the recurring ones I'm getting you to build this year is an issue of healthcare. So we're going to go back to healthcare here. There's a quick link to a document. The document's not brilliant, but it talks about how individualism and collectivism don't have to be exclusive. That the wealth created under individualism by individuals like Bill Gates can then, through philanthropy, be returned back to the community. So some individuals like Bill Gates, they've given away billions of dollars to charity, and that's not a taxation that's being forced upon them. That's a gift that they're giving back to their community by choice. And it shows that although they've unlocked great wealth through individualism, there's also a potential in their hearts that they will see a collective responsibility. So there's some other links here that are going to be more specific about healthcare, and we're going to be contrasting Canada and the U.S. healthcare systems at times. And there's some questioning about prescriptive drugs. Some prescriptive drugs can be very cost adverse, right? Like there are people who need them that can't afford these prescription drugs. And the argument sometimes is that the government should regulate the cost of drugs so that there's never going to be a situation where someone can't afford life-saving or life-altering prescribed drugs. But there's a counter argument, and if you're looking for a pro-individualist, pro-free market spin on the healthcare system, this one here, why we don't have generic insulin, might be an important article for you to look at. So in these documents, I try to balance individualism and collectivism. I'll have links that promote one, I'll have links that promote the other, because it's not really my job to lead you to one ideology. It's my job to expose you to more than one ideology so that you can try to determine where you're at on these concepts. Definitely to make this kind of introduce this article for you a little bit, why we don't have generic prescriptions. One of the key things is that through competition, we've been able to create prescription drugs that are life-altering. That if you remove the profit incentive, if you end up creating generic and regulate the cost and create generic prescriptive drugs, if you remove the profit incentive, then that's going to destroy the incentive for competition. And it's through competition that in the last 150 years we've unlocked all of these life-altering prescriptive drugs. That not all of them, mind you, but a lot of these drugs were created by individuals working for corporations looking to make a profit. You take away the profit incentive, and we might end up stagnating in terms of our physical health. Now, we got some numbers comparing how much money is being spent on different healthcare systems. And one of the things that always surprises people is that the United States spends more of its GDP on healthcare than many of these other countries. So this chart's in here for a few reasons. One reason is that you're going to need to be able to read charts on your diploma exam. You might see a chart like this on A1, source interpretation, or you might have charts that are a part of a multiple choice set. But here you have a chart that's looking at healthcare expenditures and compares the US, the UK, France, and Singapore. But the US is spending more of its GDP on healthcare, even though countries like France and the UK spending almost half, have a more desirable healthcare system. And one of the thoughts here is that because the US system has a larger private enterprise, private property element to it, it's less cost effective. That many of the services provided are for profit, and that means that some of the surgeries some of those doctor visits are more costly in the US. Another thing that makes the United States more costly is the added level of privatized health insurance. And these privatized health insurance boards are for profit, and therefore they are adding more economic strain to this industry. Ironically, again, we can see corporate taxation between the US and Canada. And you would expect that in Canada, corporate taxation would be higher than the US because Canada is seen as being less of a free market than the United States. And one of the ways to take freedom from the market is to tax those within. But Canada, as you can see by this chart, has enjoyed, or corporations within Canada, have enjoyed, years of lower tax rates than they would in the United States. And even within Canada, you have some provinces like Alberta that are even more corporate friendly than others like Quebec. So this is a surprising chart because we associate Canada with being more collectivist economically because the Canadian government provides more social services and therefore must tax corporations, you would think, to pay for them. But that's not what we're seeing in this chart. So sometimes charts can give you information that can seem interesting. Now, here's a tax perspective on some of the U.S. presidents. You can see that, at its heyday, we had high of taxation rates of in excess of 90%. In fact, during World War II and just after World War II, the taxation rate on the top 1% of earners was close to 100% for their income for that year. And you can see that it slowly goes down until you have Richard Nixon and a top tax rate of 70. And then we have this revolution, this Reagan revolution, where Reagan cuts taxes on the rich from 70 down to 28. Bill Clinton brings it back up to 39. George W. Bush brings it down to 33, and Obama was trying to raise it to 40, and everybody was freaking out, saying, oh man, that's too high, the taxes are too high. And the cartoon here is trying to give us an historical perspective and suggesting that 40% that Obama was wanting to tax that top income earners, that top tax rate, historically wasn't too high at all. It was more fitting with the pre-Reagan era, but it was still a fraction of that. So we have some charts here to make you look at taxation, and this is a nice one because it compares the taxes and benefits that a single mom or a lone parent might get as opposed to the taxes and benefits that a dual parent family might get. And as you can end up seeing, the net income before housing costs ends up becoming equalized even though that the earnings are not. The earnings of the single mom are, 85.6 pounds, and the gross earnings of the family are 620 pounds. But due to the presence of government in her life and the presence of taxation in their life, they're equalized. So one of the principles of collectivism is equalizing, right? Equalizing the economic realities that we face. And here you would have an example of a collective leaning society because they are taxing those with wealth and redistributing it to those without wealth. She's getting a child tax credit. She's getting a working tax credit. She's getting a take-home pay. Take-home pay is what she's earned. But she is being taxed less as well, and she's receiving a housing and council tax benefit. So when you're writing an essay, and you're trying to talk about what relationship should the government have with the governed. Another layer to that, or nuance to it, is what relationship should we have to each other? What responsibility do neighbors hold to each other? And in socialized states, I don't mean socialist, I mean socialized states where there is some redistribution of wealth, we may have programs like housing and council tax benefits and child tax credits and working tax credits to equalize the amount of wealth that we have so that we can all stay above the poverty line. So even within this chart here, there's the essence of a nice case study. And then there's some cartoons. This cartoon is being critical of the United States. Often people see, corporations on welfare, but the individuals are being told that they must go get a job. So there's some irony there. All right, that, my friends, is a quick look at lesson number 4.